There is nothing wrong with your radio.
Do not attempt to adjust the volume.
We are controlling the broadcast.
For the next hour we will control all that you hear.
You are about to experience the knowledge and insights of the Media Mothership.
All right, welcome to the Media Mothership, broadcasting out of Nipaluna Studios here in Hobart, Tasmania. On Media Mothership, we explore how media can shape our understanding of the world around us. I'm your host, Dr. Craig, joined by MC Taylor. Dent.
Close enough.
I managed to mash up my typical co-host who's not here today, Taylor, with the first start of your, maybe it's like a kind of one of those weird fan fictions.
I mean, potentially. It's could maybe I've I don't know, quantum leaped. Maybe Taylor's quantum leaped into my body. That's a terrifying thought.
Because they relaunched Quantum Leap to kind of lukewarm reactions.
There's not many 80s shows that have been successfully rebooted as new shows.
Yeah, Battlestar Galactica, which is kind of early 80s.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that kind of successfully managed to reboot.
Although MacGyver did okay, didn't it?
I didn't even... Yeah, you're right. They did reboot MacGyver, but again, it doesn't seem to have captured the critical zeitgeist, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe you're right. Maybe in terms of an audience reaction, I mean, I think it did have quite a few seasons. The A-Team movie, I quite liked, but it was one of those kind of movies where you could see they were going to spin it off into sequels, but they never got the audience. But I thought that shaped up quite well, the A-Team movie.
Also, Hollywood really needs to stop casting Liam Neeson as Americans. Like, I like Liam Neeson. He's a terrific actor. He's got a great presence, but just stop trying to hide the accent. It doesn't work.
My favorite Hollywood bit of news was the kind of tongue-in-cheek joking between, who was it? The Family Guy showrunner, and he'd made a joke that Liam Neeson could never be in a Western because that Irish accent would never work in a Western, and Liam Neeson caught him up in it, and it was like, oh, the film is Ways to Die in the West, or something. It was the Seth MacFarlane?
Seth MacFarlane, yeah.
Indeed, Liam Neeson is in there with his Irish accent as a cowboy. And a lukewarm reaction. I have vague memories of watching it, but I'm thinking maybe I just saw it on YouTube as a condensed set of clips. It's one of those films where it's like, I think I watched that as a condensed set of clips on YouTube that someone commentated.
Find that's the best way to consume anything that Seth MacFarlane makes.
Well, we are here to help you consume wrestling, WWE, a little bit of WrestleMania. So as we're discussing today's exciting wrestling material with our expert, MC Dent.
Expert is a stretch.
You've definitely seen more than most people I know, and you're passionate, which counts for a lot.
I've only been into it for like the last sort of like year or so. And trying to catch up on 40 plus years of history has been a challenge.
Well, which is normally the huge learning curve, right? I mean, that early learning curve can be really exciting to get into. Do shoot us a message, SMS on 0488811707 if you do have any comments. Hopefully the audio is okay. I don't know, I'm hearing gremlins in my system. Are your headphones okay?
It reminds me of when you used to have like a mobile phone next to a dial-up internet router.
Yes. Occasionally I'll get this weird dial-up router sound.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the audioscape I'm trying to create accidentally on today's show. Definitely gremlins in what I've plugged into the Edge radio equipment today. Because, as people know, I try to stream on air as well, so I'm streaming on YouTube and Twitch. So do feel free to jump into YouTube or Twitch as well if you'd like to comment. So without any further ado, let's click over to the first topic. Yeah, with a bit of musical recharging there to signpost. We're doing the next topic now, which is a little bit of news. So wrestling news, I was trying to see what wrestling news is there at the moment. There's not too much probably to comment on what I've come across. The most salacious bit of news, of course, is yesterday the Department of Justice has now opened officially its investigation into Vince McMahon and WWE. And the subheading there is the DOJ, Department of Justice.
DOJ.
Just sorry, DOJ.
Not the dog.
Which they really missed that acronym possibility. The Department of Groovy Justice. Anyway.
I used to work in a call center, and we had a specialist technical team, so STT, and eventually all of them got sacked except for one of them, and I was like, so now he's a specialist technical individual, but that
it's not really a team.
That acronym did not catch on.
So that would be the so what was the acronym? It was the
Specialist technical individual.
STI.
STI.
Yeah. Okay. That lands tragically.
Yeah.
So the DOJ is officially investigating the claims of a former WWE employee who accused McMahon of rape and sex trafficking. So yeah, this is, I mean, with the scandalous news, of course, of Trump's guilty verdict today.
Yep.
It feels like this is and I guess potentially the kind of cancel culture, the idea of particularly figures of power, male figures of power, old male figures of power being brought to account. Do you see this as part of it? Is this a great cleaning of house? I know you mentioned before, who was it, the son-in-law of Vince McMahon taking over, and the sense that this is a whole new area? Yeah,
Paul Levesque, also known as Hunter Hearst Helmsley, also known as Triple H.
Triple H.
When at WrestleMania 40, which was not long after McMahon essentially got pressured into resigning because of his, accusations of sex trafficking. Also, trigger warning. I'm sorry, we're probably a couple of minutes too late for that. But
that's true. Yeah, if you do have difficulties or concerns, please do a Google search.
Take care of yourself.
Yes.
But regardless, so essentially a huge part of the build up to WrestleMania 40 and a huge part about the payoff of WrestleMania 40 is that it is the Paul Levesque era. Triple H is in charge of the booking now. People have been waiting a very long time for this because McMahon's not had any rivals for 20 years. So essentially he could do whatever he wanted. He had carte blanche. He didn't have to listen to fans, and fans were getting very sick of the stories he was telling.
Kind of Game of Thrones, dictatorship, medieval, feudal style. It's like you're either with me or against me. And
basically, I mean, people have been fired for coughing near him. If people don't do exactly what he wants, he'll fire them. And he has made a lot of the women on the roster do extremely degrading things, which he thinks are amusing for some reason.
So again, it's a really interesting time to jump into WWE. I mean, the other bit of news, there's been Polycon wrote an article about it recently, and The Verge wrote an article recently about Netflix and the shift that Netflix has made into working with WWE. And the Verge article is quite interesting because it talks about that complete contrast where Netflix initially set itself up as wanting to be like HBO, creating quality golden age, or the best TV possible. But this WWE shift is a real tonal change, it seems. Have you thought much about the Netflix WWE connection? Is this a really exciting way to engage with WWE at the moment?
I think it's a logical progression because wrestling has always been something that's viewed on cable television because essentially if you're not paying to see it, then they're not making money.
Is Australia Netflix going to get this?
I believe so. It's with Binge at the moment, but I would be very astounded if it was not moved to Netflix in Australia. I imagine it would be a worldwide shift. But this essentially shifts to what is the modern cable TV, I guess, model, which is streaming services. You pay to watch stuff on streaming services. So back in high school, my best friend was obsessed with wrestling. I didn't watch it because I didn't have cable, but I heard all about it, all the stories, all the updates. He'd literally if he was king in handball, he would start doing the dance that The Rock does before he warms up the people's elbow. So I knew all about what was happening, but I never saw any of it. And that's what's been interesting
Yeah.
about getting into it quite recently, because with Reliving the War, that series that I watched, actually going back and reviewing all of the stuff from the late 90s, early 2000s, it's finally getting to see it, all this stuff that I've heard about. I'm like, wow, this is what it looked like. Fascinating.
Because WWE, WrestleMania, it is one of those spaces which, much like Star Wars, even if you've never watched Star Wars, it has immersed so much into the culture that you're kind of familiar with some of the big names. Well, and I guess some of the big names are now transitioned into Hollywood and have still brought part of their wrestling personality, or they're discussed in terms of having been ex-wrestlers like The Rock. In fact, it was fascinating as someone that only really knew The Rock post-wrestling, like in his Hollywood career, to hear when he'd come back. You were talking last show 2 weeks ago when he was brought back into wrestling, and his kind of the discourse around Rock's re-entrance into wrestling. At one level, people saying kind of didn't go according to the script in terms of it seemed that The Rock had set itself up as the hero or as this kind of celebrity, and quickly the fans turned against him.
Yeah, he thought that he could just come back and become the main good guy of the company and challenge the main villain at WrestleMania, which is the biggest live event of the year for WWE every single year. When the fans historically despise it when part-timers take opportunities that could be given to people who are on the roster every single week. And they've been building up that story with Cody Rhodes, who'd been the face of the company for a little over a year as the main good guy. And he was wrestling every week, and they were very, very clearly telegraphing that he was going to win at WrestleMania against his arch enemy Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
And people were furious that The Rock tried to take that away from him. In real life, and again, because WWE, like all professional wrestling, the outcomes are predetermined. It's all staged, even though a lot of the stuff that they do is exceptionally dangerous. It's all staged, but often there's so much crossover between the storylines and also what happens in real life. Because in the late 1990s, Triple H, the current head booker, and The Rock were arch enemies. They were each other's biggest rival, and now they're the two guys who are competing at the very top of running the business. So it's just because they both wanted different things. They were trying to push the product in different directions. It's just fascinating, just the extent to which art has imitated life, or rather, life has imitated art.
Yeah, it's a fascinating convergence, I guess, there of so many identities. I guess you've got the celebrity identity, the kind of constructedness of that. Then you've got wrestling itself, pro wrestling, with the idea that people are also enjoying the story that's coming out of these challenges. And then inevitably, it's what must be so entertaining also about reading some of the news sources and information sources about wrestling, the kind of behind the scenes troubles or conflicts which are there, which then add more flavor to the performed troubles which are happening. You've mentioned in the past some really useful sources people can go to start their homework on WWE. What are some of the sources? You mentioned a newsletter, for instance.
Yeah, the Wrestling Observer newsletter, which it's operated for about 45 years now. Since the late 1970s. It's been written by Dave Meltzer the entire time. So Dave Meltzer, he's a sports journalist who specializes in combat sports. So mostly, even though WWE isn't strictly speaking a sport, it's a performance, but he covers that. He's covered UFC, and every single week he does the Wrestling Observer newsletter. And he's very old school. It took him until 2006 for it to transition into being online. But
so before that, it was
paper and post.
Really?
You had to subscribe, and he would post it out to you.
Wow! And that was until
2006. And what's really fascinating is that most of it from sort of like 1990 onwards has been digitized and uploaded. So you can go back and see exactly what was happening in the world, not only in the storylines, but behind the scenes as well. Because he'd go and he had his inside sources. He's never named them, but he has his sources who give him updates on how things are going. And you not only can you see what was happening at the time in the business, but also it's just fascinating seeing how he'd leave like a 1-900 number that you had to call to vote on what your favorite match was in a pay-per-view, or ask any questions, or you could also fax in your favorite result.
That old school audience participation,
Yeah.
getting polls going, so much more difficult than today's, Facebook poll. What's his current framework for creating polls and audience interaction?
Oh, it's all done. It's all done online. So I don't think he has a huge amount to do with it because it's combined. The Wrestling Observer newsletter has combined with Figure 4 Weekly, which is that's a website which has a podcast and various other. It has written reviews as well, but it's a lot more sort of multimedia than the Wrestling Observer newsletter, which is strictly speaking a newsletter. They're called dirt sheets in the industry because they're newsletters that have a whole bunch of insider gossip and dirt with what's going on. But they've combined together, so you can find the Wrestling Observer newsletter on the Figure 4 Online website. Figure 4 Online, not Figure 4 Weekly, sorry, Figure 4 Online, which is named after Ric Flair's signature submission hold. Ric Flair being widely regarded as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time.
Yes.
And someone who really should have retired a long time ago because he wrestled until he had his final match when he was 73. And
it's ancient.
They could look. Without being ageist, they could not use smoke and mirrors to hide the fact that he just did not look healthy.
But still, I mean, I guess for the amount of beating a body like that has gone through.
Yeah, absolutely. But what's really interesting is that similar to film reviews, Dave Meltzer, when he's writing the Wrestling Observer newsletter, he'll give every match in a pay-per-view a rating out of 5. And so there is a huge mystique around what he deems to be 5-star matches, the very best of the best, and his reasons for saying that they are 5-star matches.
And what's any particular things going on at the moment in that?
He's sort of gone through swings and roundabouts in that he was very sort of loath to give out 5-star matches to WWE throughout the 2000s. There were no 5-star matches in the 2000s. I think there were only 3 in the 1990s.
Wow.
And it took until 2011 for them to get another 5-star match, which was one with, oddly enough, with John Cena, who everyone says can't wrestle for toffee. He had a match with CM Punk, who was an indie darling, and the fans have always loved him. And that was one of the earliest Money in the Banks that people loved. But he's been giving out a lot of 5-star ratings in the last couple of years, especially to All Elite Wrestling, AEW, which is at the moment WWE's only real competition in terms of North American.
And that's a different
brand altogether.
Yep.
Completely different brand. So what they did was Cody Rhodes, who is now the top guy with the WWE, his career was floundering in the mid card in WWE. He wasn't the main event by any stretch, so he left. Co-founded All Elite Wrestling, AEW, and they actually brought back a whole bunch of guys who'd been really big in the 1990s the 2000s during the Monday Night Wars, including the commentators. Tony Schiavone, who was one of the main commentators for Jim Crockett Promotions and WCW in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. He'd actually been working as a barista for Starbucks to pay the bills, and so he's back in as a primary commentator. Jim Ross, who worked with WCW in the 80s and WWF, the then WWF for most of the 90s and the early 2000s.
Wow.
They do commentary together, which is it's just terrific, just how much passion they still have for it. And they brought back a lot of guys who had thought they had retired. One of the biggest success stories was Sting, who not the musician, but a wrestler he'd basically wrestled since the mid '80s till the mid 2010s. And he'd avoided WWE for most of his career because he thought that they would mismanage him. And lo and behold, he did a year and a half with them, and he lost almost all of his matches and then had to retire prematurely because of an injury.
Oh.
But he came back in his early 60s, basically just to do a one-off match as a member of a tag team. And his partner, who was in his 20s, they basically just were sparring for funsies at Sting's home ring. And his partner said, "Why don't you just come back and do this again? You're terrific." So
wow.
And Sting is someone who throughout his career had always been in real life he's quite he's a nice mellow guy, so he's completely unsuited to all the politicking that goes on, and he'd lose titles, he'd have opportunities he had his thunder stolen more times than you could possibly count. And what was really great about AEW, his run in AEW, is that because it was people who'd sort of grown up watching him doing the booking, he was always treated as this highly respected legend of the ring. And he didn't lose a single match More to the point, it's an unwritten rule that wrestlers always lose their final match to help their younger opponents look more impressive moving forwards. And he actually said, I'm happy to go out on my back and get pinned, clean the ring. And AEW went, no. You are going out as a champion. You are retiring undefeated in our company.
Wow.
Because you've been messed over so many times. We want you to go out with some dignity.
Which is very rare, as you're saying.
It is becoming less rare. There have been a few instances quite recently where an older wrestler has gone out on top, which is, there's some discussion about whether or not it's the correct decision. Another example that's happened quite recently was Stone Cold Steve Austin came out of retirement after 19 years to have one final match at WrestleMania 38, and against Kevin Owens, who's it's super popular. He's very, very stout but extremely acrobatic, and the audiences really love him. And he's really good at playing a heel. He can play a bad guy really well or a good guy really well.
So the heel is the bad guy and the face is the good guy.
Although it's not even that they're good guys and bad guys. You're expected to boo heels and cheer faces.
Yes.
So sometimes you've had really pious, self-righteous dudes as heels and like lovable anti-villains as faces. But essentially the story they were telling, because it was happening in the match, that WrestleMania that year was in Texas. Stone Cold Steve Austin is very well known as being a Texan. His nickname's the Bionic Redneck. And so basically the story there was that Kevin Owens essentially picked a fight with all of Texas, insulted it non-stop in the build-up because it's extremely nationalistic. And Kevin Owens is French-Canadian. So essentially the story they built up, him goading this old hero out of retirement, there was simply no way that he could have won that and it not ended in a huge backlash. But everyone basically, everyone ended up, and again, the fourth wall is so fragile. It's so strange. But Kevin Owens got a huge amount of respect, even though he lost that match. He got a ton of respect because he's basically the only person because Austin has a ton of injuries. He had to retire at 38 because of a neck injury. And Owens ended up getting a ton of respect for not only being the only person who Austin trusted enough to work with, but also how he managed to make a guy in his late 50s whose knees at this point are essentially bone on bone, look really impressive and look really strong from the way he was faking injury, like taking bumps and like acting injured.
Really?
So basically, even though he lost the match, he got over. When the audience likes you, it's called getting over. He got over with the audience as a heel, as a performer, because he'd done such a good job making Austin look like $1 million.
Wow. Again, because a lot of that's lost when you watch a movie and you see a stuntman doing something similar for the actor. Make the actor look good on that particular shoot, but the stuntman's efforts are often forgotten, lost. It's interesting that in wrestling, the literacy around making the other guy look good by appropriately reacting in pain or taking a blow more dramatically than it seems.
Yeah.
In fact, it was hilarious 2 weeks ago when you were talking about how that can also be overdone deliberately as well with that was the Hulk Hogan match which came out here.
Oh, yeah. Shawn Michaels versus Hulk Hogan at SummerSlam. I think it was in 2004. It was supposed to be a trilogy where they each won a couple of matches. I don't know who the ultimate winner was supposed to be, but Hulk Hogan reneged on that and just decided, let's just do one match and I'm going to win it. And so Shawn Michaels was described by one reviewer as a human slinky, basically just bouncing all over the ring. And it's very fondly regarded as a performance, but everyone agrees it's a terrible match, but it's impossible to watch it without bursting out laughing. Some of the best slapstick you'll ever see.
And again, that kind of literacy and understanding of the wrestling mechanics pays off.
Yeah.
Because of, not only seeing how, a good defeated wrestler that's scripted to be defeated can perform that really elegantly, but also if it's done overboard in a knowing way, I guess, to themselves. Maybe, Hulk Hogan wouldn't have been in on that in terms of that would have been something that was kind of deliberately politically done to set up the ridiculousness of that demand.
Yeah, he's visibly angry throughout the match.
Oh, really? Hulk Hogan was aware halfway through that.
Well, because Shawn Michaels was trying to
selling it.
In real life, it's like, let's call them by their real names. Michael Hickenbottom was trying to humiliate Terry Bollea. It's not so much...
It was personal.
Yeah, it was extremely personal in real life.
Wow, and that's the kind of match that you'd go, you'd start to dig in further about what was the politics leading up to that, what's the fallout afterwards, which is where these newsletters, YouTube channels would be so rewarding to engage with. I mean, where did you hear most of the information about that match from?
Mostly from the dirt sheets, but also from a surprisingly good resource for wrestling information is TV Tropes.
TV Tropes,
which is a website that, pardon me, it is a website that collects storytelling information, storytelling devices, but it's got a huge amount of detail about professional wrestling.
Wow, because normally, like, you type in like Game of Thrones or something, and then it will break it down in terms of, here's all the tropes that Game of Thrones has exploited or used, damsel in distress, and then it will link all these other media. But wrestling is also incorporated with sophisticated cliches and kind
storytelling devices.
Right. So you'll dip into TV Tropes.
Yeah.
How granular is it? Can you look at particular wrestlers and matches, or?
Absolutely. There's only a few matches that have their own page. Most, like, all the really big wrestlers have their own pages. The big pay-per-views have their own pages. There's like evaluations of like best like awesome moments. So TV Tropes will have things like awesome moments, so like something happens that's really cool, funny moments, something happens that's really funny, heartwarming moments, something that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy, and tearjerker, which is like really sad moments. And they have a ton of those as well, because there have been a lot of moments in wrestling that were deliberately done to try and get that emotional reaction out of the audience.
So if you wanted to create a wrestling character yourself, heading to TV Tropes and seeing how some of the effective wrestlers have basically exploited these cliches and perform them well, because does it also link to or indicate the best matches that wrestler did that perform that particular trope? Or?
Yeah, most of them will. So if you go to the Awesome Moments page, a lot of them will. So for Ricky Steamboat, for one instance, he's not a household name, but he was a very big face in the 80s. That talks about the high quality of a lot of his matches, because he had what is called the Holy Trinity, especially by fans of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, because he and Ric Flair had 3 matches in the first half of 1989, and all 3 of those got 5-star ratings from Dave Meltzer for the Wrestling Observer newsletter.
Wow, which, as you say, is huge accolades.
Yeah. But the really frustrating thing is that Ric Flair said, I think the matches that we had in the 70s are better, but they weren't recorded, so there's that whole what if thing.
Fascinating. All right, so let's have a look now at shifting on to the main topic of today's. I'll just there we go. Yeah, remind us.
We'll be right back.
Wake up our audience. So 2 weeks ago we were looking at some of the really interesting matches. This is from Den of Geek. This is from an article they put together, the best WrestleMania matches of all time. So what I want to have a look now, we were at, I think, number 9.
No, we've done number 9 and we're up to number 8.
Right.
And the thing about WrestleMania is that WrestleMania is essentially the climax of most feuds.
Yeah.
So for a lot of WrestleMania matches, the emphasis is more so on the story than the actual quality of the in-ring action. So they will sometimes try new things, but quite often the really, really good matches might be something like SummerSlam or Survivor Series, because people are more invested in the end. There's almost always outside interference in a WrestleMania match, because it's all about the story, and it'll be no disqualification, and someone's friend will come out with a steel chair and bop the other guy over the head.
So this is the end of the year. These are, remember, and even I knew the branding WrestleMania from way back with WWF. So this has been one of these perennial big branded moments.
Yep.
So I'll play a little intro here from, this is, what is this? Daniel Bryan versus Batista versus Randy Orton.
Oh yes, the triple threat main event match from WrestleMania 30.
So why there are 3 wrestlers in this one?
3 wrestlers in this one, yes.
Okay.
It was originally supposed to be just Batista and Randy Orton, but the fans got behind Daniel Bryan in such a huge way. McMahon and the other creative guys had no intention of using him, but the fans cheered for him so much and booed everyone who wasn't him. They had no choice.
Well, let's hear some of that cheering.
Oh no. Randy Orton. Is he going to that place?
So what we're watching here, what is the drama that's unfolding?
The drama that's unfolding is that whoever gets the pin will be I believe this was for the Undisputed Championship. And so the main story is, because it's 1v1v1, there's no teams in this. And the story is, because the main point of view character is Daniel Bryan, who's a smaller guy. He's not he's not the kind of monster or superhero that I'd normally go to. Because Vince McMahon, when he was in charge for those 39 years, colossal fan of muscle-bound superheroes. He always went for big guys. And Daniel Bryan is not a big guy. Like, he's obviously very athletic. I was trying to say aesthetic, but it's more athletic than aesthetic, because he's like a bit more lithe. And so essentially what we're seeing here is it's all about him having to overcome so many obstacles to get to the main event, because this was his second match of the night. The first match he had to fight against Triple H, it's ironic that someone who is so celebrated right now for the direction he's leading the company in was for many years essentially the main or the second main villain of the entire story.
Wow.
Triple H has always worked best when he's been the main heel that the faces have to overcome.
Really?
There are a couple of times where he tried to make himself the main character, and he's been referred to as the Reign of Terror. He was very well known for being extremely jealous of anyone who might threaten his spot in real life. And so if he thought anyone might take his attention or his spotlight, then he would just bury them and try to crush them and make them look weak.
And I noticed in the crowd there was an Australian flag. Is there much international fandom that come to these events with flags and so forth? And
I could not tell you what the numbers are, but people will travel from all over the world to go to WrestleMania.
So here we have two belts.
Yes, I believe it was the World Heavyweight Championship. I think it was a belt unification. I haven't seen this one, and I can't recall it off the top of my head. I do know some of the story around it, and essentially his fandom was called the Yes Movement because of his habit of pointing out both fingers up in the air, up and down, going yes, yes, and the audience would chant yes with him.
Well, that's positive, I guess. I mean, yeah, you don't even know. All right, so the number 7 one is Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks, and we covered Bianca Belair. Is she the
Bianca Belair is at the moment one of the main tag champions, but she's a terrific performer. She has really long braided hair that she weaponizes her hair, like she'll whip people with it.
So this is WrestleMania 35.
37.
37. Oh right, yeah. Thankfully, WrestleMania 37, coronation of Bianca Belair fulfilled the potential of what a WrestleMania main event should be. These two put on what might still be WrestleMania's greatest women's match ever. There's an awesome story about how the two overly confident women butting heads. On one side, it's Sasha realizing that she's up against and becoming increasingly frazzled and frustrated. On the other side, Bianca is able to get under Sasha's skin, but that only makes her overconfident and susceptible to letting her guard down. Not to mention, there is a lot of awesome offensive and defensive use of Bianca's braid, as you're saying. Right, including when it culminates in a thunderous whip from the hair that signals how this amazing bout is all but over. Holy cow.
And this was, 37 was the year where there was no one in the audience.
Really? Oh, right, because of COVID. Right. Sorry, we're jumping to the
that's all good. Nothing. Oh, yeah, Royal Rumble 2022.
There you go.
And the Royal Rumble it's such a big part of the build-up to WrestleMania because it whoever wins the Royal Rumble gets to challenge for whatever title they want at Mania.
Right. Wow. Is this a match that has much discussion? Have you jumped in to watch this one, or?
I haven't seen this one either. I haven't seen a huge amount of stuff from the 10s or the early 2020s. I really should go back and watch this one because Bianca Belair is doing great stuff as a tag team champion right now. And Sasha Banks, she ended up jumping ship to AEW.
Right.
I don't think she was getting treated particularly well.
All right. So this next one looks like a one even I would know. Steve Austin versus The Rock in WrestleMania 14.
19.
19, jeez. Okay, yep, you're right. XIX. It's not XIV.
Yes.
XIX.
This is the third installment in their WrestleMania trilogy.
Right. So, let's get through this. All right.
There's some serious backstory to this one.
Right.
Because, so essentially the night before WrestleMania 19, so essentially Stone Cold Steve Austin had a horrible injury in 1997 where he got dropped on his head.
That's horrible. That's like concussion and vertebrae damage. And...
Yeah, I think it bruised part of his spinal column.
And he got dropped on his head. And did he still had to do more? Or?
Yeah, he's actually said that the first thing he thought of was Christopher Reeve.
Oh my gosh!
And he basically had just enough energy to mime knocking the other guy over and pinning him. So he won the match, but
really? So he
still had to finish the match, yeah. But he had to get dragged out by 4 referees.
And this still gets choreographed, right? And so this is one of these moments that breaks that illusion of it's safe and actually shows you that sometimes actually real damage can occur.
The ultimate horror of it is that his opponent, Owen Hart, because it was a pile driver, which is you hold the other dude upside down, you pretend to smash his head into the floor. It's perfectly safe if you land on the knees, but Owen Hart landed on his rear. And Austin kept on saying, "Please land on your knees so that I don't have my head smashed in the mat." And Hart said, "No, I'll be right. I can do it." And so he lands on his rear and smashes Austin's head into the mat, which completely changed Austin's style and led to a series of. He took a year off to get spinal fusion surgery at one point, but he basically was a really great technical wrestler and then had to go for basically full-time brawling because his body couldn't handle it.
Right.
So now the Mania 19 match against The Rock, he's dealt with creative burnout. He's dealt with all these horrible injuries. His knees are just shot to pieces. He's got back problems, neck problems. And to deal with all this stress, he's been drinking tons of caffeine. He's been drinking way too much alcohol. And he'd actually been hospitalized the night before.
What?
Because he said what he had was essentially an anxiety attack times 1,000. He was going to have a heart attack. And he wasn't medically cleared to wrestle. But he'd beaten The Rock in their encounters at 15 and 17. He said, "I owe it to The Rock. I have to go out there and lose to The Rock." Because the Rock story at that point was he was Hollywood Rock. He was a heel who thought that the WWE was beneath him. And his story was he was obsessed with beating Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania.
So at this point, The Rock had, of course, previously has been in the, the Mummy 3 CG?
The Mummy 2, yeah.
2?
Mummy Returns.
And that was, I guess, the big breakout.
Yeah, and
role.
also Welcome to the Jungle.
And then you had him lead. So is this before or after Welcome to the Jungle?
It's a little bit after, because I believe that was like 2002, and this was a year or so after.
And his performance there was great. I love that movie, Welcome to the Jungle. Okay, so this is after that.
Yeah. So they're both leaving. So Austin's got to retire because he's so banged up, and The Rock's going to go and be in Hollywood. And so this story is very much the end. The story of the match is that it's the very end of their rivalry. The Rock is obsessed with getting his win in, and Stone Cold knows that it's over. And he throughout the match, Stone Cold does not look healthy. At the start, his eyes are all glazed over, and he's sort of breathing through his mouth, and it's like he just does not look like he should be there.
What's the kind of post-action report on this? I mean, the Dirt Peepers, how have they unpacked this in terms of like The Rock knew what he was going into at this point? Like, even though this was happening the night before, he was in hospital.
The Rock 110% knew, because you can see that he's very careful not to injure Austin. In fact, most of the matches, it's them trading each other's finishing moves. So it's largely based around finishing moves, and
which will look great on TV.
Yeah, but so he actually, at the very end of the match, after Austin's been pinned, and it takes 3 rock bottoms to put Austin down for good, and people have said that he politicked for it. But it's the climax of a rivalry that had been going for 6 years at this point. So it takes a lot to put Austin down for the count. And at the end of it, The Rock puts his head next to Austin's head and whispers something. Austin whispers something back, and they never said what it was until quite recently on an Instagram post. The Rock said, because his rivalry with Stone Cold Steve Austin is part of what elevated him. Mm-hmm. It does tend to get overblown a bit in hindsight. There's a lot of revisionist history. It did help elevate The Rock, but it wasn't the only thing that did. It did give him his first main event at WrestleMania 15. But basically, what Rock said to Stone Cold was, "I cannot thank you enough for everything that you have done for me. I love you." And Stone Cold said, "I love you too." And Stone Cold's actually talked about that.
What a tearjerker.
He's actually said, 2 tough-ass guys out there in front of millions of people saying they loved each other.
And again, this would be on TV tropes, and it would break down with the tearjerker trope. Well, in retrospect, maybe.
Tearjerker or heartwarming. And yeah, because in the story, Rock and Austin have never been friends. They've always been enemies. So for them to break character like that, and as they walk off, and Rock hugs his family. He turns around and he basically gives a nod of approval to Stone Cold. And then as Stone Cold is leaving, they play his music as well, which is so rare.
Right.
Normally,
so both Steve Austin.
So normally they only play the winner's music, but as Stone Cold is leaving, they play his music as well. Because he knew that was going to be his last match because he couldn't keep on competing with his injuries, but he did stay on the show for another year as general manager after that. But it's interesting that they chose 19 because generally people think that 17 is the best match.
Yes, yet on this ranking they've given this one as the number.
It's the number 6 slot, and but the WrestleMania 17 has an ending that is just truly terrible.
Yeah, well, he says, this is going to be a controversial choice as Stone Cold and The Rock mixed it up 3 different WrestleManias with WrestleMania X7. 17 usually receives all the love. It's a great main event for sure, but the booking around it is iffy. And it doesn't quite hit the landing, especially with the Texas crowd refusing to play along with Steve Austin heel turn.
Because at the end of Mania 17, because Stone Cold's story after coming back from having a year off for spinal fusion was that he'd lost his top spot to The Rock, and he was desperate to get it back. He had to win that championship. So in real life, Steve Austin just likes playing a bad guy, and even though he'd been a face for a solid four years at that point, since. But he basically insisted on turning heel.
And the local Texas crowd just didn't play along.
It was not a good idea because Vince McMahon comes out. He pulls The Rock off Austin when Rock's trying to pin him. He gives Austin a chair. Austin literally hits The Rock 16 times with the steel chair. And he turns heel in his home state and joins... Vince McMahon was Austin's arch enemy. So he turns heel in his home state and then joins his arch enemy. And... this basically that happened and WCW closed that same week, and that ended the boom period.
Wow,
that was the Attitude Era because people didn't want to see Austin as a bad guy. They were because The Rock was leaving for Hollywood, so there wasn't a main hero to cheer for. So basically, people switched off in droves.
Yeah. So it then goes on to say that as for WrestleMania 15. It was also solid, but existed as little more than a pleasing catharsis in Austin regaining his title after a year of Vince McMahon messing with him, as you've said.
Yeah, Rock in Mania 15 he's more of a henchman than his own guy.
So their third and final meeting, which we just talked about, was special in its own way, feeling like a genuine end of an era. Unlike the Undertaker vs. Triple H match in WrestleMania 10,
28,
15, 18, thank you. 28, which felt self-important. Austin's body was falling apart, and this would be the last match for nearly 20 years. The Rock had a foot out the door, but despite all his great accolades, he still felt empty due to his inability to beat Austin at the Showcase of the Immortals. That added to the emotion of the match, giving us an ending that really felt like Austin had exhausted every little bit of fight left in him, so that both he and The Rock could move on with their lives. So Austin came back in 20 years' time?
He came back for WrestleMania 38, which was 2022. And he came back he had a match against Kevin Owens that we talked about earlier. He had that at the end of night 1, which is it's basically it's a huge nostalgia fest. There's nothing new. He just hits all of his old moves. Although there is a bit... There is a bit where he gets suplexed onto concrete in the middle of the crowd, and you watch that and you're like, this man is almost 60. Man, it's astounding. But it's also partially just a huge commercial for his Broken Skull American Lager. Because because like Stone Cold's main post-match thing is like his entire personality is he drinks beer and beats up his boss. That's his entire personality.
And then he released a brand of beer.
Yeah, so he's got...
What is it called? The Broken...
It's called Broken Skull after his ranch because he owns a ranch because what else is he going to do with his time? He runs a ranch now. And he so they've got an IPA, a lager, and there's also Broken Skull IPA, which is somehow different. But it basically throughout it, he's just throwing back cold ones, and at the end of it, and the way that he drinks beer is hilarious. He'll hold the beer a solid foot above his mouth and crush it out of literally squeeze it out of the can, and he gets it all over himself so that he doesn't drink it and get absolutely tanked. He literally he literally spills about a case into his mouth and doesn't drink any of it.
During a match?
This is usually it's his post-match celebration. He'll get the beers out, but he's drinking throughout the match. And he's actually said it was because he had really dry mouth because he was like so unused to that level of physical exertion. He weaponizes at one point, like he takes it and then spits it all over Owens. It's disgusting.
Oh my gosh. All right, so number 5 is Razor Ramon versus Shawn Michaels.
Oh, this one. This is the first ever ladder match at a WrestleMania event.
And what does a ladder match mean? So that's when...
So the story here is that Shawn Michaels throughout the 90s was just this angry, bitter brat, essentially. He was a huge prima donna, and he would never lose a belt in a match. He would fake an injury, or he would say that he had depression and just drop it. And so he'd be stripped of the title. And so he forfeited the Intercontinental because the Intercontinental belt it's one you have in the middle of the card,
right?
So you can have a championship match, but like halfway through the show. And so he dropped it, and his good friend Scott Hall, whose character was Razor Ramon, ended up winning it off another wrestler. And then Shawn Michaels comes back from an injury and goes, "I'm the real Intercontinental champ. I never lost it." So they have 2 Intercontinental belts suspended above a ring, and you've got to climb up the ladder, and whoever grabs both is the winner. Yep.
And is that a new idea to bring a ladder into? Because as we can see, that ladder gets weaponized, it gets kind of thrown around.
They'd had ladder matches in Japan, and I believe they may have had some in sort of like Lucha Libre or maybe NWA. But this is it's only the second or third one because they'd practiced a ladder match at a house show and untelevised between Michaels and Bret Hart,
just to see how much damage a ladder does, how it can be used, and seem more dangerous than it is. Because obviously it looks super dangerous, and obviously they're selling the pain really strongly.
And so, essentially, you've got to climb the ladder, grab whatever's at the top. They always have more than one ladder these days because there's only one ladder here, and there are a couple moments where it buckles under the weight of 2 really big dudes. And if they'd broken it, did they have a spare ladder that they could use? Right. What would they have done? But they're both great performers, but Shawn Michaels is one of the best ever, and this has been described as Shawn Michaels has because this is a 5-star match according to the Wrestling Observer newsletter.
Gotcha. All right.
And it's been described by Ric Flair as Shawn Michaels has a 5-star match with the ladder, and also Razor Ramon is in the ring.
So Razor Ramon doesn't really.
He's basically the straight man. It's all Shawn, because Shawn Michaels is the bad guy, and Razor Ramon, who's basically this rip-off of Tony Montana from Scarface, he's the good guy. And it's basically just Shawn does all these insane stunts, like he jumps off the ladder to do a splash onto Ramon. He gets whacked with the ladder, gets catapulted into the ladder, does all this ridiculous stuff. Gets tangled up in the ropes at one point. It's just him just doing his usual, because Shawn Michaels is an extremely airborne performer, because like he's big but he's not super heavy, so he could do a lot of very like floaty moves.
And as you're saying, with one ladder it gets really damaged. That ladder gets really damaged, but they still have to use that ladder to get it.
Yeah.
Even though the ladder is becoming more and more insecure.
Yeah. Look at it, like we're watching it right now. Look at it wobbling. That looks so unsafe.
Yeah. So this is again 5-star match.
Yeah,
you would agree in its ranking.
And the most one of the oddest things about it, and again that really fragile fourth wall, is that Razor Ramon won. Shawn Michaels lost that match, but everyone is so enamored with Shawn Michaels' performance, they forget that he's the one who lost that match because his performance is so good.
Wow. Yeah. The article goes on similarly to point out that, it got a huge spotlight, the ladder. The two proceeded to work their asses off, laying down the groundwork for dozens of other ladder-based matches in the decades that follow. WWE even organized a rematch between the two a year and a half later in SummerSlam 95, but it was nowhere near as good as the first hard-hitting clash between the Heartbreak Kid and the Bad Guy. The bout did run long enough to bump a 10-man tag match off the show. Yeah,
they ran overtime, and so these 10 guys who were supposed to be in a tag match, it was going to be their biggest payday of the year, and they completely missed out. And there is a story about Macho Man Randy Savage storming backstage absolutely furious. And he says to Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels, he says, look, I want to say that you both did really good work out there, but you're both very, very selfish.
Wow. So does this often happen where because this would have been a choreographed, complex bit of work that then never got aired?
Well, that's the thing is like, at that point in time in the mid-90s, wrestling was very much called on the fly. So like they were largely improvised. Like guys would work together before a match. They'd plan out the major spots, but a lot of it's called in the ring where they just whisper to each other when they're in headlocks and such. But yeah, so they basically 10-man tag match just didn't happen because these guys ran over.
And all that remains is the kind of the dirt rags talking about how later, the complaints that then leak out. And,
yeah.
Wow. Well, look, you're at 5-2, so sadly we'll wrap it up at, where are we, number 5.
So we've got 4 more to go.
4 more to go. But it is exciting. And again, it's worth checking that out, the Den of Geek Top 10. And obviously they're all linked to some excellent YouTube. In fact, it was interesting to watch the Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels one, because that's actually an interview. Well, like it's their reaction shot. So it's got Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon now watching that clip, reacting to it. So
yeah, this was a couple of years ago. Scott Hall passed away from I think it was pneumonia a couple of years ago.
Because it must be really entertaining to go back, to bring back these stars or these performers and get them to react to some of these amazing wrestling matches, and the I guess the NDAs have gone now, and they can
absolutely.
talk really freely about how it had gone down. Anyway, so fantastic as always, Marcus, and looking forward to in the near future, hopefully doing the last 4. It's immensely entertaining. If you are interested in wrestling, where do you go to get your wrestling fix? Is it just Bing?
You can stream like literally all of WCW and all of WWE is on Binge. Everything that company owns, you can watch on Binge. Every episode of Raw, every episode of Nitro, every pay-per-view. AEW, I've tried to watch that, but it's very difficult to get it all in the one place. Or if you want to watch reviews, Wrestling with Regret is really good.
Wrestling with Regret, that's a YouTube.
It's a YouTube channel, yeah. Where he'll break, like the Brian Zane, who is also a retired wrestler, he'll break down pay-per-views or like what makes a good wrestler. And if you want to watch a whole bunch of older, like recaps of older stuff, Wrestling Bios, Reliving the War is great because it contrasts the episodes of WWF Raw and WCW Nitro that aired at the same time slot.
And then follow up with TV tropes.
That
is a genuine surprise. I love TV tropes, and I underuse it as a resource. And now knowing that wrestling's in there, what doesn't TV tropes have? Well, thanks again for listening. Keep listening to Edge Radio 99.3 FM. K-Pop Unlimited is going for a break, so there'll be some great Edge Radio tunes. And then after that, at 6 is Adrian's show, You Can't Sit Down. Marcus, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And this has been Media Mothership for another week.